Welcome to my channel, Spooky's Stories. Have you ever walked through a place so silent that every step feels like it's echoing through history? I've stood in towns in Georgia where laughter, work, and life once thrived, but now only crumbling walls, empty streets, and whispers of the past remain. The feeling is almost haunting, like the land remembers the people who lived and disappeared here. Today, we're uncovering 10 shocking abandoned cities in Georgia that hold secrets, stories, and memories you won't believe exist. If you're enjoying this journey through Georgia's abandoned towns, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Spooky Stories for more amazing explorations. 1. Skull Shoals, Georgia. I remember the first time I set foot in Skull Shoals, Georgia, and the instant I felt the air heavy with silence and memories, like the ground itself was holding its breath. This wasn't a movie set or a story I had read online. This was real, and standing there made it impossible not to feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. Skull Shoals was once a thriving mill city in the early 1800s, built along the strong currents of the Oconee River. Cotton mills roared day and night, warehouses lined the streets, and families lived in small wooden homes, working tirelessly to keep the town alive. I had read about the floods before visiting, especially the devastating ones of 1887 and 1916, but seeing the ruins firsthand gave me a completely different understanding of what it meant for a community to be wiped out almost overnight. As I walked through the overgrown streets, moss covering broken brick walls and foundations half swallowed by trees, I could imagine the life that once pulsed here. The children running to school, smoke rising from mill chimneys, laughter and voices filling the air, and then slowly realized that it was all gone. The wind rustled through the empty paths, and in that quiet, the town's story seemed to whisper to me, heavy with memories of lives suddenly abandoned. I sat on a fallen brick near what used to be the main mill, listening to the river flowing nearby, and I understood why locals say people feel uneasy here, not because of ghosts in the traditional sense, but because the sudden disappearance of life leaves a weight that lingers in the air. There is no haunting in the supernatural sense, yet the ruins carry a presence, a reminder that real people lived, worked, struggled, and then vanished, leaving only stones and silence behind. As I left Skull Shoals that day, the feeling stayed with me, a mix of awe and sorrow, as if I had touched history frozen in time. The town, once full of life, now waits quietly, holding its secrets, and anyone who visits can't help but feel the stories of the past pressing against them, a reminder that this abandoned city is not a legend, it's real, and it leaves its mark long after you've walked away. 2. New Manchester, Georgia. I still remember the first time I wandered through New Manchester, Georgia, and how the air felt unusually still, almost like the town itself was holding its secrets, waiting for someone to notice the echoes of its past. Once, this place was a thriving mill town, bustling with workers, families, and the constant rhythm of cotton mills grinding day and night. But now, standing among the crumbling brick walls and collapsed rooftops, it felt as though time had simply stopped. Built in the early 19th century, New Manchester grew rapidly because of its strategic location near the railroads and the Ocmulgee River, which powered the mills and connected the town to the rest of Georgia. Families moved here for work, children played along the streets between warehouses, and the smell of cotton and smoke filled the air, creating a community that was both alive and tightly knit. But as decades passed, floods, economic decline, and changes in the textile industry slowly drained the town of its life. By the mid-20th century, most mills had closed, jobs vanished, and families left their homes behind, leaving only empty streets and silent buildings. When I walked through the town, stepping over broken floorboards and rusted equipment, I could almost hear the faint hum of the mills that once defined this place, and for a moment, It was easy to imagine children running past me, workers shouting instructions, and the smell of fresh cotton drifting in the air. I sat on the steps of what used to be the main factory, brushing moss from the bricks, and I realized how real the weight of abandonment felt. The town wasn't just empty, it carried the presence of those who lived and labored there, a quiet testimony to the lives that were abruptly uprooted. Even today, locals say you can feel the echoes if you listen closely, the sense that a once thriving community still lingers among the ruins, haunting the trees and broken pathways rather than with ghosts, but with memory. Leaving New Manchester that afternoon, I felt a mixture of awe and melancholy, as if the town had whispered its story directly to me, reminding me that behind every abandoned mill town lies real people, real struggles, and a life that once flourished but is now only visible through stones, shadows, and the persistent silence of a place forgotten by time. 3. High Falls, Georgia. The first time I stepped into High Falls, Georgia, I felt an immediate stillness that made every sound of my footsteps echo unnaturally, as if the town itself was holding its breath and waiting for someone to notice the remnants of its past. Once, High Falls was a lively mill town, alive with the constant rhythm of water-powered mills, workers carrying bales of cotton, and children running along dirt streets lined with small homes. But now, all of that life feels frozen in the ruins that remain. Built in the 1800s along the flowing waters of the Tawaliga River, the town thrived because of the mills that turned raw cotton into fabric, providing jobs and attracting families seeking stability. For decades, the mills dominated daily life, their loud machinery a symbol of progress and prosperity, while the town's streets bustled with markets, schools, and social gatherings that formed a tight-knit community. But over time, floods, fires, and economic decline slowly drained High Falls of its vitality. By the early 20th century, many mills had shut down, and families moved away in search of better opportunities, leaving behind empty houses, overgrown streets, and buildings slowly crumbling into the earth. Walking through the remains today, I could see brick foundations covered in moss, wooden beams collapsing under the weight of time, and remnants of machinery that once powered the town, and I felt the presence of those who had lived and worked here, a silent testimony to lives abruptly disrupted. I paused near the old mill dam and listened to the water rushing past, imagining the energy and movement that once defined the town, and it was haunting how real the absence felt. Local historians often say that High Falls carries the memory of its past residents in its silence, and I could understand why. Standing there, I felt the echoes of daily life that no longer exists, a mixture of history, human effort, and loss pressing down in every corner. Leaving High Falls, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked through more than ruins. I had walked through a story of people, dreams, and a thriving town that nature and time had slowly reclaimed, leaving only whispers in the wind, broken walls, and a quiet sense of awe that stays with you long after you leave. 4. Griswoldville, Georgia. The first time I arrived at Griswoldville, Georgia, I felt an eerie stillness that seemed to stretch across the empty fields and ruined buildings, as if the land itself was holding the memory of a community suddenly erased. Griswoldville was once a thriving industrial town in the 1800s, built around grist mills, textile factories, and gunpowder production, attracting workers and families who relied on the booming local economy. Walking through what remains today, I could see the skeletal remains of brick chimneys, foundations half covered by grass, and rusted machinery lying where it had stopped decades ago. And it was impossible not to imagine the bustling streets, the sounds of hammering and machinery, children playing in the alleyways, and the smells of mills and smoke filling the air. The town's fate was sealed during the Civil War, when it became a target for destruction, and Union forces burned much of Griswoldville to the ground, leaving families displaced and businesses in ruins almost overnight. Over the years, nature slowly reclaimed the area, erasing roads, covering foundations with vegetation, and leaving only scattered remnants that hint at the town's former life. I wandered among the ruins, brushing moss off crumbled walls and stepping carefully over broken beams, feeling a deep connection to the lives that had once existed there, the hopes, struggles, and everyday routines that were all abruptly interrupted by war. A local historian I spoke to explained that despite the absence of modern structures, Griswoldville's presence is felt in its silence. There's a weight in the air, a sense of people who lived and worked with purpose, then vanished, leaving the land to slowly take back what was theirs. Standing there, listening to the wind moving through the broken walls and open spaces, I couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and sorrow, realizing that this was more than ruins. It was a real story of lives altered forever by conflict, a community erased from maps, but not from memory. Leaving Griswoldville, I felt the lingering impression of the past pressing softly against me, a quiet reminder that history is alive in the land, and that the echoes of human effort, ambition, and loss remain even when all else has disappeared. 5. Auraria, Georgia. I still remember the first time I set foot in Auraria, Georgia, and how the air seemed to hum with history, as if the ground itself was trying to whisper stories of the gold seekers who once filled this town with hope and ambition. Auraria was once the heart of Georgia's gold rush in the early 1800s, attracting miners, merchants, and families dreaming of striking it rich, and the streets would have been alive with the sound of pickaxes, horses' hooves, and townspeople rushing to trade and celebrate their finds. Walking through what remains today, I could see broken wooden buildings, collapsed storefronts, and empty lots overgrown with weeds, and it was hard not to imagine the hustle of daily life, the laughter of children running past the saloons, and the tense excitement of miners uncovering the glittering promise of gold. The town grew rapidly, but like many gold rush settlements, its prosperity was short-lived. As gold deposits dwindled and miners moved on, businesses closed, homes were abandoned, and the vibrant community faded into silence. I wandered the empty streets, stepping carefully over fallen boards and rusted mining tools, feeling the weight of lives that had chased dreams and then left everything behind. A local historian told me that some of the original foundations and mine shafts still exist, hidden under moss and dirt. And standing near one of these old shafts, I felt a strange mix of awe and melancholy, imagining miners leaning over to extract the gold that had once made this town thrive. Even though no one lives here now, Auraria carries a presence in its quiet, a reminder of ambition, struggle, and the impermanence of fortune. Leaving Auraria that day, I felt as if I had walked through the heartbeat of a town that had lived, dreamed, and vanished, leaving behind only the echoes of pickaxes, footsteps, and laughter, gently pressed into the soil by time. And I knew that this abandoned gold rush town was not just a story from a book, but a real place where real people lived, struggled, and moved on, leaving a mark that still lingers for anyone willing to listen. 6. Oscarville, Georgia. The first time I stood at the edge of what is now Lake Lanier, Georgia, I could hardly imagine that beneath the calm, shimmering water lay an entire town, once alive with families, schools, and bustling streets. Oscarville was a small, close-knit community that existed in the early 20th century, thriving on its mills, farms, and local businesses, and its people shared generations of stories, celebrations, and everyday life along the banks of the Chattahoochee River. I had read about how the creation of Buford Dam in the 1950s led to the flooding of the area, submerging Oscarville completely. But seeing the lake and knowing that every house, road, and church now rests silently underwater made the loss feel intensely real. Walking along the shoreline, I tried to picture children running to school, neighbors chatting along the streets, and the clatter of daily life that once filled the air, now replaced by the soft lapping of water and the occasional call of a bird. Local historians explained that the town's displacement was part of the larger plan to provide hydroelectric power and water supply, and while progress demanded the sacrifice of Oscarville, it was impossible not to feel the human cost. the lives uprooted, the memories left behind, and the community erased almost overnight. I closed my eyes for a moment and imagined the old town under the water, schools and churches frozen beneath the surface, and felt a strange mix of awe, sorrow, and respect for the people who had called it home. Even today, descendants and visitors sometimes talk about the sense of history lingering at the lake's edge, as if the town's spirit can still be felt, not in ghostly visions, but in the quiet weight of memory pressing against the water. Leaving the lake that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something extraordinary, a real place where generations lived and thrived, now resting beneath the lake, and I realized that Oscarville's story isn't a legend, it's a tangible reminder of lives and communities sacrificed for progress, a hauntingly beautiful truth that stays with anyone who takes the time to imagine what once was. 7. Sunbury, Georgia. The first time I visited Sunbury, Georgia, I felt a strange quiet that seemed out of place, almost as if the trees and the river were holding their breath to protect the memory of a town long gone. Sunbury was once a thriving colonial port town in the 1700s, bustling with merchants, sailors, and traders, where ships would unload goods and the streets were filled with the chatter of commerce and daily life. Walking along the empty streets today, I could see crumbling foundations, remnants of brick buildings, and overgrown pathways where children once ran and neighbors once gathered. I tried to imagine the smell of salt water mingling with the smoke from nearby chimneys, the clatter of horse-drawn wagons, and the excitement of townspeople watching ships arrive with goods from distant lands. Over time, repeated attacks during wars, hurricanes, and the shifting course of the river slowly led to Sunbury's decline, forcing families to leave and businesses to close, until eventually the town was abandoned and swallowed by nature. As I stepped carefully over broken bricks and uneven ground, I could feel the weight of history pressing around me, and it was easy to picture the vibrant life that once existed here, the markets, the celebrations, and the everyday routines, now replaced by silence and the soft rustling of leaves. A local historian shared stories of how Sunbury's residents had tried to rebuild multiple times, only to be thwarted by natural disasters and changing times. And standing there, I felt a deep connection to the resilience and struggles of the people who had called this place home. Even without a single person in sight, Sunbury feels alive in its memory. Every ruined wall and overgrown street tells a story, and the quiet is full of echoes from the past. Leaving Sunbury that day, I felt a mix of awe, melancholy, and respect for the lives that had flourished here and then vanished, and I knew that this abandoned colonial port town was not just a story from a book, it was a real place with real people whose lives and labors left a mark that still lingers quietly for anyone willing to listen. 8. Ebenezer, Georgia. The first time I walked through Ebenezer, Georgia, I felt as if I had stepped into a place where time itself had slowed, leaving behind whispers of prayers, hymns, and the quiet lives of people who once lived with deep faith. Ebenezer was originally founded in the 1730s by German Lutheran settlers seeking a safe place to practice their religion and build a community guided by shared beliefs. As I wandered among the overgrown paths and crumbling building foundations, I could almost hear the echoes of church bells ringing, children laughing on the streets, and families gathering in small wooden homes for worship and fellowship. The town grew slowly but steadily, with farms, workshops, and meeting halls supporting a self-sufficient community, and for a time it thrived in relative peace. Yet over the decades, floods, disease, and the gradual migration of younger generations to larger cities slowly emptied the settlement, leaving homes abandoned and public buildings to crumble under the weight of time. Walking through the ruins today, I could feel the lingering presence of the people who had devoted their lives to their faith and their town, and it was impossible not to imagine their daily routines, the lessons taught to children, and the struggles of life in a small but determined community. A local historian explained that Ebenezer's original church foundations and cemetery still survive, giving visitors a tangible connection to its past, and I spent a long moment sitting among the ruins, imagining the devotion, work, and hope that once filled the air. Even without anyone around, Ebenezer feels alive through its history, and I could sense the resilience and dedication of its residents in every fallen wall and hidden corner. Leaving the town that day, I felt a deep mix of respect, nostalgia, and awe, realizing that Ebenezer is not merely a forgotten settlement, but a real place shaped by real people, whose lives, faith, and struggles have left a quiet but enduring mark that can still be felt by anyone who visits and listens to its silent story. 9. Dungeness, Cumberland Island, Georgia. The first time I set foot on Cumberland Island and approached Dungeness, Georgia, I felt a strange mixture of awe and solitude, as if the island itself was holding on to centuries of history, silently guarding the stories of a once grand mansion and the people who lived there. Dungeness was originally built in the early 1800s as a private estate, later expanded into a massive mansion that overlooked the Atlantic Ocean, hosting wealthy families and social gatherings in a time of elegance and privilege. Walking among the ruins today, I could see the crumbled brick walls, fallen columns, and remnants of staircases that once led to grand halls, and it was impossible not to imagine the footsteps of servants, the laughter of children, and the echo of conversations that once filled the estate. Over the decades, storms, fires, and hurricanes slowly destroyed the mansion, leaving only skeletal remains that nature has begun to reclaim, while the surrounding forests and dunes overgrow what was once meticulously maintained gardens and walkways. I wandered carefully through the ruins, stepping over broken stones and listening to the wind rustle through the trees, and I could feel the weight of history pressing down, the sense that real lives had unfolded here, filled with ambition, leisure, and daily routines, all of which are now only memories etched into the stone and sand. A local guide told me stories of how the families once lived lavishly, yet faced challenges from the harsh island environment, and I could almost see them moving through the halls, carrying on with life that now exists only in imagination. Even though the estate has long been abandoned, Dungeness carries a presence, a reminder that history is tangible when you walk among its ruins, and that the grandeur, labor, and lives of real people left a mark that time cannot completely erase. Leaving Dungeness that day, I felt a deep connection to the island's past, a mixture of wonder, melancholy, and respect, knowing that this abandoned estate is more than ruins. It is a living memory, silently telling the story of a family, a place, and an era that can still be felt by anyone who walks through its remains. 10. Taylor's Creek, Georgia. The first time I stood at the banks of Taylor's Creek, Georgia, I was struck by a quiet that felt almost unnatural, as if the water itself was trying to tell me the story of a town that had disappeared from memory. Taylor's Creek was once a small riverside community where families lived and worked, relying on the creek for fishing, transport, and powering small mills, and the town thrived with children playing along its banks, merchants trading goods, and neighbors gathering for community events. Walking along the overgrown paths and remnants of foundations, I could almost see the hustle and bustle of daily life, the sounds of work, the laughter of children, and the steady movement of life that has long since vanished. Over time, floods, economic decline, and changes in the local industry forced residents to leave, and slowly the town was abandoned, leaving behind empty houses, rusting tools, and streets overtaken by nature. As I explored the ruins, stepping carefully over moss-covered stones and fallen wooden beams, I felt the presence of the people who had lived here, their hopes and struggles etched into the land itself, and it was impossible not to imagine the lives that had been uprooted by circumstances beyond their control. A local historian shared that the creek still carries traces of the town under its waters, and standing there, I could almost feel the flow of history passing by, connecting me to the families who once called this place home. The quiet of Taylor's Creek is heavy, but alive, and even without residents, the town seems to whisper its story to those willing to listen. Leaving the site that day, I felt a deep sense of awe and melancholy, knowing that I had walked through more than ruins. I had walked through the echoes of real people's lives, work, and dreams, now vanished, but still present in the river, the earth, and the silence that remains. Taylor's Creek is not just a lost town, it is a reminder that communities rise, thrive, and sometimes disappear. Yet their stories remain, quietly waiting for anyone who takes the time to notice. As we leave these abandoned towns behind, it's hard not to feel the weight of the lives that once thrived here, their stories quietly echoing through the ruins and rivers, reminding us of the passage of time and the fragility of human communities. Each town holds secrets, memories, and lessons from the past, waiting for someone to notice. If you enjoyed exploring these forgotten places with me, don't forget to like this video, share it with fellow explorers, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of history, mystery, and abandoned wonders. The past is always closer than you think. Stay curious and keep exploring.